Thank you, ladies, for reading the beautiful story of Ruth. And what an incredible story it is. We have some major themes in the book of Ruth, some things you already know. You're probably already looking for the kinsman redeemer, and that is good and that is right. And yet there's so many other things that are going on here that we want to continue on what we talked about before. So we have made it all the way from Ruth all the way back to Abraham. Right? We're back at Abraham. Seems like we've cracked the mystery on this Iska person and this weird family dynamic that's going on in the end of chapter 11 of Genesis as we are introduced to Abraham in chapter 12, verse 1. And so we asked ourselves, what is up with this thing of uncles marrying nieces? It sounds really barbaric. It sounds really out of date. It sounds really weird. And all those things are probably true. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually go forward in the text to a later commandment that shows what is going on here in Abraham. So Abraham is Genesis chapter 11 actually, right? Abraham and Nahor are marrying the nieces. That's Genesis chapter 11. We're going to go all the way to Deuteronomy chapter 25 to figure out what is going on back in Genesis chapter 12, okay? Remember how we talked about before in the first section, remember how we talked about that sometimes things are written later to explain something else earlier, right, with the Haran thing, and there's stuff like this all through the scriptures. So now we're going to go all the way to the end of Deuteronomy, and we're going to find out what this is about. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 and 6, it says, "If brothers live together and one of them dies and has no child, the man's widow shall not marry an outsider. Rather, her husband's brother shall be intimate with her and take her to him as a wife, thus performing the duty of a husband's brother with her. And it will be that the first child that she bears will perpetuate the name of the dead brother, that his name not be blotted out in Israel." So this is a concept known in the Torah, known as Yibum, Y-I-B-U-M. This is known as Yibum, and in our context, it's uncles and nieces. So there are two primary reasons given for performing Yibum. And number one is to care for the woman who was a part of your family through marriage, to your brother. And in Deuteronomy, the case is a widow, and in our case, it's daughters. So there is the brother of Abraham who dies, and he has two daughters and a son. The second reason for Yibum is so that the dead person's name will not be blotted out from Israel. It is to give him a legacy. Haran has a son, Lot, and two daughters. Okay? The stories, so that's kind of explains what's going on. Why do Abraham and Nahor do this thing? Why do they marry their nieces? Well, because remember the Torah we threw out there that the Torah, the Ten Commandments, might be actually a codification or a culmination of Abraham's ethic and Abraham's his mission, his assignment. Well, he is doing something here that really was pretty familiar in the ancient world, is something that many cultures practiced. And here is it ensconced in the Torah in Deuteronomy. So there's a couple reasons given for this we just read about. Here's a cool thing of one of the patterns of the Bible, especially the Torah, that you can look for as you're reading through the first 5 books, especially the Torah and especially in Genesis. This is a huge feature of the way the book of Genesis is written. That is one story, maybe even though it's not chronologically, thematically one story links to the next story. And there usually is a link between each story that we find throughout the changing narratives in the book of Genesis. So if we want to get a clue and narrow down kind of what Abraham was doing when he was marrying one of his nieces, I know, every time I say it, I feel like I'm going to go take a shower, but this is an ancient time. This is a different thing, right? what is going on here, we have to actually go back and look at the story before this. And what is the story before this, if you know your Genesis chronology? What is the story before we get introduced to Abraham? What's the thing that happens right before it? It's the Tower of Babel, okay? And we've talked extensively about the Tower of Babel, but we're going to do it just to refresh your memory. We go to Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. It says, "Now the entire earth was of one language and uniform words, and it came to pass when they traveled from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled there." Now that phrase, "and they settled there," this is a hint. Hang on to that phrase. Verse 3. "And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and fire them thoroughly.' So the bricks were to them for stones, and the clay was to them for mortar. And they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make ourselves a name.'" Yes, I'm being deliberate there because that's a point. "Lest we be scattered upon the face of the entire earth." Verse 5, "And the Lord descended to see the city and the tower the sons of man had built. And the Lord said, 'Lo, they are one people, and they have one language, and this is what they have commenced to do?' Now it will not be withheld from them all that they have planned to do. Come, let us descend and confuse their language, so that one will not understand the language of his companion. And the Lord scattered them from there upon the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore he named it Babel, Bavel. For there the Lord confused the language of the entire earth, and from there the Lord scattered them upon the face of the entire earth. And they said to one another," this is going back to verse 4, "Let us build a city and a tower." We've talked a lot about this city and this tower. We believe it was probably a what? A really funny name, starts with a Z. Ziggurat, right? And for those that haven't heard this before, what is a ziggurat? Well, in the ancient world, you only worshiped your God on the top of mountains, on high places. High places with its top in the heavens is the place where heaven and earth meet. It's the place where heaven and earth come together. You can see this in all the ancient cultures, especially in the East. You watch, do something, next time you're watching TV, watch something funny like Kung Fu Panda. Have you ever seen Kung Fu? I know, random. But when he goes up to seek his sages or oracles or any of this kind of stuff, what does he do? He goes way up a mountain to a little shrine. When it shows watch any Kung Fu movies or anything like that, they go to a temple, watch Mulan. All these steps, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of steps up this huge temple. Look at the Mayans and the temples that we have there. Ancient cultures all over the world have done the same thing. They believe that you met your deity on the top of a mountain. There's a problem, though, with this, in this story, that they are in a place called the Valley of Shinar, or Shinar. If you're in a plain or a valley, there's one thing you don't have, and that's a mountain. So what do? You build one, which is why they were making bricks, and it says the bricks were as stone to them. Because if you have stone, you use the stone. They didn't have stone, so they made bricks, and they built a fake mountain. And today we call that a ziggurat. Now the mountain is not the temple. The ziggurat is just to get the temple elevated up towards closer to the heavens, where the hope is that when you put your temple on top of a ziggurat that you just made, your expectation is that your gods will come down and fill and live in the temple on top of your ziggurat. And what happens in our story? God comes down. It worked, right? They build a ziggurat, they stick a temple on top, and it works. So why is God so perturbed about this tower, about this ziggurat, about this thing? Well, we read the purpose for it, and what was their purpose for it? Does anybody catch it? I went really slow. To make a name for themselves. To make a name for themselves. All right. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 11. You guys with me? You still okay? I know you're sleepy. This will be over somewhat quickly. Go back to Genesis chapter 11, verse 27. We're going to start. "And these are the generations of Terah. Terah begot Abraham, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. And Haran died during the lifetime of Terah, his father, in the land of his birth, in Ur-Kasdim. And Abraham and Nahor took themselves wives, and Abraham's wife's name was Sarah, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. And Sarah was barren and had no children. And Abraham took Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarah his daughter-in-law, the wife of Avram his son, and they went forth from the Ur of the Chaldees to the land of Canaan, and they came as far as Haran and settled there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Canaan. We passed a phrase in that reading that we just read in the story of the Tower of Babel. Did anybody catch it? Anybody catch it? It's in verse 31. They went forth from Ur Kasdim to go to the land of Canaan, and they came as far as Haran, and they settled there. Do you remember what we read before in Genesis 11? Now the earth was one language and uniform words, and it came to pass when they traveled from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. In Hebrew, it's the same. It's not just the same in English. In Hebrew, it's the same exact phrase. And they settled there. Here's a fun fact. These are the only two places in the Torah that this phrase appears. Is in the Tower of Babel story, and it's Avram leaving Ur Kasdim going to the land of Canaan. It's the only two places that this phrase appears just like this in the Torah. Do you think that maybe there's a connection, there's a pattern there that we are supposed to see? It's the very last thing God does with Abraham before he actually goes into the land of Canaan. And what would you think would be the purpose for sticking this phrase there? Part of our problem with studying the Bible is not that we don't know Hebrew and Greek. It's not that we are not historians. It's not that we are not masters of the geography of the biblical ancient lands. The problem with us studying the Bible is not that we don't have a good grasp on ancient Near Eastern customs. It's not that we don't understand Judaism. It's not that we don't. None of those things are our problems. Those are actually highbrow excuses for us not studying the Bible. You know what our problem is? We don't read well. That's the problem with us studying our Bibles. We don't read well. Because if we were to read well, we would have noticed these settlings. There's two settlings that are the language is intentionally linking these two stories together. And we're supposed to ask ourselves the question, why is this like this? What is the scripture what is the author trying to get out of us? How are they trying to engage us in the story? Let me propose maybe the question that's being asked is Abraham a tower builder? Is Abraham a tower builder like the last time we heard this story? And not only is he a tower builder, but what was the purpose of them building the tower in the last story? Make a name for. Is Abraham going to be a tower builder for his own name's sake or not? I think that's really cool. Is it possible that this quest to Canaan, this journey to Canaan, is symbolic in some ways? Not just pragmatic, but is it symbolic in certain ways? See, the people in the Tower of Babel went to the valley of Shinar and they built a tower, the name for themselves. What's the biggest test that Abraham faces in his life? The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, right? What is that? That is sacrificing his what? His name, his legacy. Is Abraham going to be a tower builder? Is he going to build towers to his own name? Or is he going to go to the land that God shows him and build towers to the name of the God of heaven? It's the question that we're being asked. It's about testing his legacy. It's about testing who he was. In light of all this stuff, and how much we know about Abraham's life, his struggle to have a child, Sarah's infertility, all of this stuff should start coming into focus. And I called the name of I called the title of this teaching, Loyalty to the Name. I know no Hebrew roots person listens to us because we've probably hacked all of them off by now, and that's fine. But certain segments of our movement are all about the name, the pronunciation of the name. And you know what? I am infatuated with the name. The difference is I don't care how you pronounce it, because the name is more than 4 letters and a pronunciation. Your name is about who you are. It's about your legacy. It's about your character. It's about your authority. It's about your personality. It's about all those things that make you, you. And I'm infatuated with that because we are supposed to be bearers of his name. And that means we're supposed to represent him correctly in every aspect. That's not what this Shavuot's about, though. It's not about his name. We have to ask ourselves certain questions then. We know Abraham's story, obviously, but if we go back and read it like we've never read it before, we have to go, well, like, okay, at this point, is Abraham a tower builder or is he an altar builder? Because an altar is kind of like a small tower. It's the way it's shaped, the way it's made. Is he an altar builder or is he a tower builder? Is he going to be faithful to his own name or to the name of his creator? Is he going to stay with Sarah knowing that she's barren? Miss Janice threw a great question out at the end of last. How did they know in ancient times if someone was barren? How'd they know? So here's my throw out guess. Some of you may actually know. When Abraham and Sarah get married, how old are they? He's, what do we say, 80, 90, whatever it is, 75? Okay, when they left. So Sarah's much younger, 60-something. And how old are they when they finally have Isaac? 15 years, 20 years past, something like that? Is that right? What if they have been trying to have a child all that time and can't, and the note about Sarah being barren is a later editor or narrator's, it's an editorial note. It's like the narrator saying, hey, by the way, Sarah was barren. Does that make sense? So it could be that maybe Abraham didn't know when he married her that she was barren. It may be a narrator's note from later. The Gospels do this all the time. And by this, he meant X, Y, Z, right? They do this stuff all the time. That's a possibility. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we're gonna get there and answer this question where it doesn't matter whether he knew or not. Now, when I taught this before, it absolutely did matter. Now I'm not so sure that it does. Okay, so let's keep going. So now, though, does the binding of Isaac take on a whole new kind of understanding? The thing was not only his son that he loved, but it's his legacy, it's his name. And remember that we said, what is the purpose of Yibum? It's to cause a name for your dead brother. So Isaac wasn't even really Abraham's name anyway. He was really there to be Haran's name. Does that make sense? Woo-wee. Well, you just stepped off in it, didn't we? But when you think about it, that's really the purpose of Yibum. So we make the Akedah all about Abraham and Isaac, which it should be. But Abraham marries Sarah, Iska, to provide a name, to preserve a name for the dead brother. And the Torah tells us in Deuteronomy 25 that the firstborn son is supposed to bear the name of, supposed to be a legacy to the dead brother, right? Yeah, in the very real sense, that's what being a brother's keeper is all about. It's about protecting your name, your brother's name, which is the essence of all they are. Remember I said a couple weeks ago, when you're talking about someone, if they're not in the room, when you mention their name, it's like it brings them into the room, right? In Genesis chapter 12, it says, the Lord said, go forth from your land and your birthplace and from your father's house and the land that I'll show you, and I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you and I'll aggrandize your name. And you will be a blessing. God says, I'm going to make your name great. And the understanding is that you don't care about your own name, so I'm going to make it great because you don't care about your name. You care about the names of others. In verse 8 of chapter 12, it says, and he moved there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent. Bethel was to the west, and Ai was to the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord, and he called. Now some of your translations will say on the name of the Lord, and some will say in the name of the Lord. And I like in the name of the Lord just because it's a little different. God promises Abraham that he will make Abraham's name great. Abraham's purpose in the wake of the Tower of Babel that we just read about is to dedicate himself to making God's name great. That's his mission. Abraham built altars, not towers. And he calls out in the name of God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, not in his own name. In return, God makes Abraham's name great, and Abraham's purpose and our purpose as children of Abraham is to focus on the names of God, a name of God, but there's more to it than that. Abraham not only cares about making God's name great, what was the whole purpose in him marrying the niece? Was to make Haran's name great, was to preserve Haran's name. And so we get so wrapped up about making God's name great, God's name great, which is what we should do. But how often do we forget to make our brothers and sisters' name great? God says, Abraham, you care about everybody else's name but your own, so I'm going to make your name great because of that. The names of our brothers, the names of God, and not our own. So pretty cool, right? So before we head back to the book of Ruth, let's zoom out just a little bit, and I'm going to show you something really, 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 really cool. The Bible's all about patterns, right? The Bible is full about patterns, so we're going to play Where Have We Heard This Before again. We're going to look at Abraham's story, and we're going to ask, where have we heard this before? Abraham's story, there's a man and 3 sons. Terah and his 3 children, 3 sons. There's another story with a man and 3 sons. In our story, in Abraham's story, tragedy strikes. Haran dies in the presence of his father. In another story, there's a tragedy that strikes in the presence of the father. I want you to be thinking, what is this other story? Sudoku. The brothers jump into action to rectify the damage in Abraham's story. The brothers marry, right? Yibum. In the other story, there are brothers that jump into action to rectify the damage as well. In our story, and he took is used in rectifying this act. In this context, it's marriage, and he took Sarah to be his wife. In the other story, it's the same, and he took, and it's used in rectifying the act. In our story, it ends with the death of the father, and in the other story, it ends with the death of the father. In our story, the family is headed to Canaan. The other story also involves Canaan. Which story is it? It's Noah. Very good. Who said that? Very good. It's Noah. Remember how I told you how Bible themes flow from one story to the next, especially in the book of Genesis? That's what's happening here. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 9. See, we're just all in Genesis, just tearing up the first 12 chapters of Genesis. Isn't it great? Genesis chapter 9, verse 18, it says, Noah's sons came out of the ark where Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. Now, why tell you that, right? Doesn't matter. Verse 20, then Noah, a man of the soil, was first to plant a vineyard. He drank some of the wine, got drunk, and was uncovered in his tent. Editorial note here, or side note here, commenter note. I never read this verse, even though I grew up in church. I never read this verse as a part of Noah's story. It was always like, oh, the ark landed and there was a rainbow and hoorah, end of the story, let's move on. And I read this and I laughed for days. I laughed for days after I read this. Because the idea was like, well, Noah was holy and he was untouchable and he did all this great stuff and he was perfect and it was great. No, God used him to save the entire world, to save creation. And what's the first thing he does? He gets verschnicked. Survivor's guilt. Or, like I'm going to do this afternoon after this long, stressful week of vacation that we had, I'm going to go have a couple Miller Lite. Yeah, because we made it, right? And nobody died. Well, I mean, except for everybody, but, you know. None of our folks died. All right, let's keep going because that's not the point. Verse 22. But he's so drunk that he's uncovered, right? Verse 22, then Ham, Canaan's father, saw his father's private parts and told his 2 brothers outside. So Shem and Japheth took the cloak. They took the cloak, and they laid it over both their shoulders and walked backwards with it and covered their father's nakedness, but their faces were turned away, so they did not see their father's nakedness. So, just stop here. Do you see that there's a tragedy that strikes with the sin of Ham? And Ham is cursed, and the brothers take action. They take a cloak, and there's all this. Abraham and Nahor help their brother, but Shem and Japheth help their father. That's a big difference, and we're going to talk about this as we go through. Genesis 9, chapter 9, verse 24. It says, when Noah woke up from his wine, he learned what his youngest son had done, and he said, cursed is Canaan, the lowest slave who will be to his brothers. So Shem, it says, so we have the curse. And there's a lot of talking about why he cursed Canaan and not Ham. We don't have time to do that today because I'm trying to get you guys out of here. So here's what we have. A father with 3 sons, 2 plus 1 sons. Tragedy strikes. The name of the brother is threatened, and a family member tries to repair the damage. That's the big pattern that we're looking at, right? A father with 2 plus 1 sons, tragedy strikes, the name of the brother is threatened, and the family member tries to repair the damage. Now, here's what's so cool. We had this happen with Abraham, right? I'll do it on this side since it makes sense for you. We had it happen with Abraham, this pattern. Then we just looked at it with Noah, right? Somebody, you might know this, guess how many generations are between these two? Not 7, a little more than 7. 7 would be, 7's always the right answer, right? There's 10. There's 10 generations between Abraham and Noah, right? So since we are, whatever it is. So since we are all about patterns and connections, what would happen, you think, if we went back from Noah another 10 generations? Where would we end up? Well, thankfully, we know where we would end up, and it's another, have we heard this story before? We're talking about the story of Adam and Hava, and his family. We're talking about Genesis chapter 4. Tragedy strikes with the first murder. Cain kills Abel, right? When God calls out to Cain and says, hey, where is Abel, your brother? What does Cain say, Roy? Am I my brother's keeper? The question seems to answer itself. We don't know, maybe the killing was a mistake, maybe it was done in rashness, like there's with a lot to pontificate about the killing of Abel. But what an incredible answer to God. How audacious is that, right? Cain could have responded any other way. He could have been regretful. He could have repented immediately. He could have had tears. He could have been sorrowful. There's a million different ways, right ways that he could have responded. Instead, in arrogance, he said, I don't know, I don't care. I'm not my brother's keeper. He didn't repent. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't try to rectify the mistake whatsoever that we know of. He literally just wiped out an entire line of humanity. Cain just destroyed a whole line of nephesh, a line of living beings, and just went like, oh, well, too bad. So if you read later in Genesis chapter 4, it said, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, and she named him Seth, for God had placed for me other seed in place of Abel, for Cain slew him. Now, what we don't see in this, because we don't know the laws of the Torah, is that this is actually a yibum as well. This is the first act of yibum. How does this work? Well, Adam and Eve do this yibum-like act to have a third son, Seth, to commemorate the loss and further the name of his dead brother, Abel. Right? So in this, it's the mother and father acting on behalf of the son. I think that's cool. I've never seen that before until I studied this. Adam and his children, Noah and his children, Terah and his children. 10 generations apart, 3 different stories. Adam and Eve, Noah, and Abraham. Here's the crazy thing about, like, we think about the days of Noah and there was no righteousness, and we think about the Tower of Babel and it was awful right before Abraham, it was terrible. Could it be that because you have parents helping kids in the Adam and Eve, then you have kids helping parents in the Noah story, but you never have brothers helping brothers until you get to Abraham? You have a brother killing a brother. You have a brother being cursed and his lineage being cursed, which you might as well wipe out. And it's only at Abraham do you have a brother restoring a brother in the story. So it seems like every 10 generations, this is a pattern. So what's the next logical question to ask? If we just went 10 generations back and 10 generations back, and we got to the beginning, where's the only other direction to go? The only direction to go is forward. We go forward another 10 generations, and these are the generations that we go through as we go forward from Abraham. We go through Yitzhak, Yaakov, Judah, Peretz, Hetzrom, Ram, Aminadav, Nashon, Salmon, and we get to generation number 10 is who? Boaz. Brings us back to the book of Ruth. Elimelech, the father, leaves during a time of famine, and the Midrash, again, which is not necessarily history, but it's some filling in of the blanks, it tells us that Elimelech was a great man, wealthy, and people looked up to him for help, but he abandoned his brothers during the famine. If the story we've been telling with Adam, Noah, and Abraham is about kindness building to crescendo every 10 generations, then by the time we get here, we have fallen really, really far. Because the one that was supposed to be the source for everyone has turned his back on his people. So Elimelech dies, and his children are Machlon and Kilion. Machlon and Kilion. Their names mean sickness and destruction. Do you think it was their real names? Biblical insight? Probably not, right? Because sometimes we read those names and we go like, I wonder what a name means. And we look it up, we go, oh my God, what would it mean to be named that? Usually when names are that significantly named, that's not their real name. It's the storytellers giving them that name to go like, hey, when you turn your back on your brothers, this is what you produce.
What if it means that's their reputation?
That's exactly what I'm saying. When as a father, when you turn your back on other people, this is what you produce. You produce sickness and destruction. When you turn your back on the names of your brothers. And when they move away and they move away from Israel to settle in the land of Moab, there's a cool linguistic thing that happens. We've been kind of keeping track of these phrases that we've had. And we had one phrase that appeared 2 times in the Torah. Do you remember what that phrase was? They settled there, right? They settled. That's Abraham and the tower builders, right? Well, it happens again here in the book of Ruth. Chapter 1, verse 4, it says, and they married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth, and they settled there for about 10 years. So again, we are, as good readers, which most of us are not, we're supposed to read this and go, I've heard this before. So is this asking the same question as it did before? See, it's supposed to be triggering this connection to you. So the phrase, and they settled there, it appeared only twice in the Torah, and here it is again in the book of Ruth. The echoes of the Tower of Babel are following us to the book of Ruth. Machlon and Kilion are tower builders. That's what they do. They learn from their father, and when he dies, they spring into action. They take wives, just like Abraham and Nahor did, except they marry Moabites. They are Israelites who marry Moabites. People who do not have the same destiny and mission as that of the people of Israel. Their children will not be considered Israelites. Cain was passive and would let his brother's legacy lapse. The children of Noah acted partially, but at least they acted. Here, the children of Elimelech are destroying the legacy of their father and of their brothers. So, what are we to conclude? Will there be no legacy for Elimelech, Machlon, and Chilion, who died without children in the fields of Moab? Naomi tells Orpah and Ruth to leave her, and she tries to convince them to put any thoughts of Yibum to rest. You guys go back home. There's nobody here that's going to marry you, right? It's impossible. Orpah gives up and walks away. I'm out. You're probably right. I'm out. And what we have to remember, we are so individualized in America, and we're so meistic. We have to remember that when Orpah leaves Naomi, she's also leaving the legacy of Naomi. She's leaving the name of Naomi and her ability to protect and preserve and further her name. So it's not just her. Funny Hebrew thing, Orpah's name contains the word oreth, which means the back of the neck. And that's what she does. She turns her back on Naomi. But Ruth, like Abraham, leaves her place of birth, leaves her sister behind, and like Abraham left Nahor, she makes the quest to Canaan. It's going the same way as Abraham did. See? Leaving Moab, going to Canaan. Sarah couldn't have children, and there was only the dimmest of hopes of perpetuating her name. Ruth had almost no hope, as Naomi had no other children, and yet she and Naomi arrive in Israel. And one thing we often miss when we read this story is that Ruth doesn't head straight to Boaz. It's like chapter, 3 before she finally gets to Boaz? 2? She happens upon his field. In Ruth chapter 2, verse 3, it says, "And she went and she came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her chance was to come to the field that belonged to Boaz, who was the family of Elimelech." So that should be the end of the story. Boaz meets Ruth, they get married, all is good, all is well, and it's great. But here's the thing about Ruth, she wasn't just there for an economic security. Ruth is not just there to get a husband so that she is cared for the rest of her life and so that she's protected the rest of her life. Ruth has something else there that she's after. She has a deeper desire and a deeper passion. In chapter 2, verse 12, it says, "May the Lord reward your deeds, and may your reward be full from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take shelter." I love this picture of Hashem's wings. In Hebrew, it's kanaf. It's the same thing that you call the edges of a talit that you hold up. We've talked about this before. You hold a talit up and you stretch it out. It's called the kanaf. In Malachi, it says that the Son of Righteousness will come with healing in his wings, in his kanaf, right? Same word. And what's interesting is the woman with the issue of blood reaches out and grabs the hem of his garment, right? No. What is she grabbing? She's grabbing the kanaf of his talit. Because Malachi said that the Son of Righteousness would come with healing in his kanaf. She knows that scripture. Right? So, Boaz blesses her, and it is Boaz's moral obligation to do Yibum for his brother that they abandoned. But Ruth confronts Boaz in that midnight encounter, that weird, like we try to make it all PG and stuff. She's seducing him. Naomi goes like, "He'll tell you what to do, don't worry." And we get all embarrassed. Like, this is life. This is real life, right? And Boaz's words come back to haunt him. He blessed her, and then now Ruth uses the same language in Ruth chapter 3. We get to chapter 3, verse 9. I don't know if you caught this when you were hearing it read. When she has this midnight encounter, he said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I am Ruth, your handmaid, and you shall spread your wings over your handmaid, for you are a near kinsman." What is happening here? This is such a cool exchange. Boaz goes, "May God bless you under his wings," which is a real, pious religious thing to say. May God bless you. What? Yeah, real Christian of it, yeah. May God bless you under his wings. And so Ruth comes back and she says what? "No, you put me under your wings." And how many times do we see people praying for things, and we have the things, and we go, we'll pray for you? What if people today were as bold as Ruth and went like, yeah, I know God's going to provide, so, well, that's not God providing, that's me providing. I'm getting in the way of God providing. Boaz said, may God bless you under his wings. And Ruth said, okay, then redeem me because that's your job. Put me under your wings. You, Boaz, you bless me that God would spread his wings over me. If you believe that God should spread his wings over me, then maybe you should too. She propositions marriage, not just for her, but because Boaz is a redeemer. This is the cool thing about women, is that women will force men or push men to do things not for their own good, but because they know that this is what the man is supposed to be. So there's always been, hey, a big amen off of that one. There's always been this saying that I've heard, that behind every great man is a good woman. And I thought I heard it wrong. People correct me all the time because I've always said behind a great man is a better woman. That's the way I heard it originally, and people go like, no, that's not how the saying goes. I'm like, well, the first person messed up then, because that's how the saying should go. Because behind every great man is a better woman. That's what Ruth is doing. She's trying to force Boaz into his job as a redeemer. And so Ruth, from outside the family and outside the nation, demands kindness for a brother, and Boaz accepts. Chapter 3, further on, verse 15, it says, and he said, ready the shawl you are wearing, and hold it. And she held it and measured out 6 barleys, and he placed them upon her, and he came to the city. And he placed, we've heard this before, and it was a cloak too, where we've heard before. You remember that? I'm stretching you, I know, but I have notes, so it's easy for me. This is with the story of Adam and his wife, and we'll hear here again at Noah. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, for she said, he has placed with me another son. Eve is saying he has placed, right? We hear it again with Noah and his sons. They grab a cloak and they place it on the back of their shoulders, right? Just cool little connections. Again, sometimes we read this stuff, we don't think anything of it. If we were reading it in Hebrew, it would be like, oh, there's that phrase. It would just punch you in the face. And it should in English as well. Boaz is establishing on Ruth here as he gives her a cloth to walk back towards her mother-in-law. A cloth to walk back, right? Where have we heard that before? That's Shem and Japheth as they're walking backwards towards Noah. And what are they doing whenever they're walking back towards Noah? What are they doing? They are preserving the name and the reputation of their father, right? Ham went in and saw and made fun of him. Shem and Japheth are trying to preserve the name of their father. So Boaz, remember there's echoes of all this stuff through. So Boaz gives Ruth a cloak to walk back towards Naomi. Maybe as a sign that he is agreeing to preserve their name. See how that works? But Boaz's agreement to marry Ruth is not the end of the story, because there's a closer relative. Did you catch that in the story when we were reading? I love this. This is cool. This is one of those little Jewish things you don't know unless you read Jewish literature. And in my translation, it actually has this. The relative whose name is absent from the book of Ruth, it just says a guy. In Judaism, they call him Ploni Almoni. And it's just a name meant to mean anonymous guy. Ploni Almoni. And in my translation, it actually has and Boaz is sitting in the gates, and he saw Ploni Almoni walking by. That's awesome, right? Just an anonymous guy. Think about how powerful this is. There is a closer relative that can, if he chooses, he can redeem and preserve the name of Ruth's family. But we know in the story, he doesn't. So retroactively, they take his name out of the story. Do you see that? They could have named him. They could have said who he was. They could have said Boaz sat at the gates with the judges and the officials and whatever, and, whatever. Shoestring walks by. I don't know, whatever. They didn't give him a name because he refused to preserve the name that he was supposed to. He didn't perpetuate a name, so his name was erased. Verse 3 of chapter 4, it says, and he said to the near kinsman, that's Ploni Almoni, Naomi, who has returned from the field of Moab, is selling the portion of the field that belonged to our brother to Elimelech. And he refuses Yibum so that his own inheritance, right, is not messed up. He chooses his name over the names of others. But Boaz does the opposite. He steps up for Naomi and Ruth and refuses to abandon his brother. And the thing is that from Boaz and Ruth, kings come from that decision as a fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. But not because simply God waited 10 generations. Abraham's descendants take up the mission statement of their patriarch, what was that mission statement? It was selfless dedication to the names of others, to the brothers, and to God. So one final question, and we're going to wrap up. We said Ruth comes from outside the family, right? And she does a great kindness to propose Yibum to Boaz and force him to do what he's supposed to do and do the right thing. So we think back on Ruth's ancestry. This is so crazy. Think back on Ruth's ancestry. This is the last really piece of hard thinking I'm going to ask you to do. Without me telling you the answer, do you know Ruth's ancestry? What nation is she from? Moab. Where do the Moabites come from? They come from Lot, who is the son of who? So Abraham, look, I wish I could see this. My mom would say the frissons. Do you realize how crazy this is? Abraham redeems Iscah. And 10 generations later, Ruth causes the redemption of Lot in his name. And this is what I tell you guys all the time. This story, the Bible story, is about one family in one small little geographic location. And you see how with Abraham, the family splits. And Lot and his daughters give birth to Moab and who else? The Moabites and who else? The Ammonites. Two of Israel's biggest enemies throughout the rest of the story. But they're cousins. They're cousins. They're all the same family. And what's happening along the way? They're folding them back in. Because somebody chose to care about the name of their brother more than their own name. We talked about Caleb several weeks ago, months ago. And we talked about this reference in in Jeremiah, where there would not cease to be a man standing before God. Do y'all remember that? It was the seed of David, it was the Levite, and it was one other family. Perizzites? Kenizzites? Can't remember the name of the family. Yeah, I can't remember. Kohathites? Yeah, they're all connected. But when we talked about that and the fact that this family, this third family, the line of David, Levites, we get that. Yeah, there'll always be somebody representing them before Shem. But this third family, remember, they weren't even actually Israelites. They followed Jethro. You remember they came from the Jethro line? And they were part of the family because Moses married, right? Jethro's part of the family, but they're not really part of the family. They're in, but they're not in. And God says, I'm going to take people who are in and push them out and take people that are not in and make them stand before me forever. So we have this constant thing of folding people back into the family, because somebody dares to care about someone else's name besides theirs. This is what the biblical story is all about. The mass revelation at Sinai is great, and that's cool, and all these commandments of the Torah, we talk about something that we've started to talk about more and more. We have this in the Gospels, and we read over it, and we read over it, and we miss it. We don't miss it. We just ignore it. Let's just be honest with ourselves. We have this constant challenge from Yeshua that reverberates through his entire life and ministry. You think about the ministry of Yeshua, how much of his teaching was really about holiness before God versus being right with your neighbors? Think about it. I don't even know if it's 50-50. It's probably something more like 80-20, which is a good ground beef ratio, by the way. I don't know what that has to do with anything. It just popped in my head, so I said it. You think about Yeshua's ministry and how much of it is dedicated to holy living before God and how much it is dedicated to living right with your neighbors. The Sermon on the Mount, that's all about relationships. Your brother's keeper, be his very stark statement about, hey, if you're at the altar and you're bringing an offering, and you remember, not that you have aught against somebody, but that somebody has aught against you, then leave it there. Yeah, but that offering cost me money. Leave it there. Yeah, but it's taken me all day to go through this process. Leave it. Don't you dare offer an offering if you know somebody has something against you, because that offering is going to be just like the offerings that Isaiah talked about. What did Isaiah say about the offerings? Why the heck do these rivers of blood run before me, God says? I don't want all this. Your offerings, they stink in my nostrils. Yeshua is saying, if you offer an offering and you know that you have aught between you and a brother, and you offer that offering, it's the same thing as Isaiah was talking about. It's no good. Don't come pray your prayers. Don't come sing your worship songs. Don't come raise your hands. Don't get the jerks and run around the building. If you know you've got aught against somebody or somebody's got aught against you, all that stuff is useless. It's trash. It's trash. Don't cry and worship and blah, 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 and lay on the floor and sprawl on the altar and ask God to forgive you for messing up somebody else. As I said a couple weeks ago, we ask God to forgive us for hurting somebody else, and God's like, I'm out. I got nothing to do with that. That's none of my business. Yeah, I didn't offend them. I didn't hurt them. I didn't destroy their reputation. I didn't spread gossip about them. I'm not the one who offended them. I don't have anything to do with this. All of the commandments given at Sinai, which we recognize on this day, on Shavuot, they are all about loyalty to our brother and loyalty to the Creator. That's the two parts of this. It's about selfless pursuit of the name of others. Listen to that. How much does that hurt your feelings? For you to tell yourself every day that your job today is to have a selfless pursuit of the name of others. Ugh. I don't like that. Because you know what? I got stuff I want to do. I got things that I want. I got a person I want to be. I got interests. I got desires. What happens if I put all that off in an an efforted pursuit every day for somebody else? I'm never going to get the things I want. See how we think? Sorry, maybe that's just me, and maybe y'all are all fine with this, and I'm just preaching to myself. Excuse me. Let me go on. So this reading of the book of Ruth, the reading of the 10 Commandments, it all fits together. The mission begins with Abraham. It's codified in the law at Sinai, and it is not until the book of